April 1943. A B-25 Mitchell limps back to base trailing smoke from one engine. The landing gear won't fully extend. The pilot lands on the belly, fuselage screaming metal against concrete runway. Debris cascades. Ground crew sprints toward the wreckage, expecting bodies. The pilot climbs out. His shirt is soaked through with sweat. His hands won't stop shaking. He's alive. His bombardier is alive. His two gunners are alive. Behind them, 5 B-25s from their flight aren't coming back. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. One man watches from the flight line, a mechanic with a clipboard and a scarred face. He's been watching this pattern for 6 weeks. Missions sent out with full crews. Half return, if that. The ones that do return, they look like this one. Torn, beaten, barely flying. Command says it's acceptable loss. Luftwaffe is strong. Allied bombing is imprecise. The math of war is brutal. But this mechanic knows the real math. And he's about to break every protocol in the manual to prove it. 15th Air Force operates out of Gioia del Colle, a captured Italian airfield in Calabria. April 1943. The Allies landed in Sicily 4 months earlier. Now they're pushing north, and the Luftwaffe is making them pay for every mile. The airfield sits on a limestone plateau surrounded by olive groves and red dust. The sky above it smells of high-octane fuel, burnt metal, and the peculiar mix of gasoline and human sweat that defines combat aviation. Merlin engines roar to life at dawn. Spitfires launch first, fighters providing top cover. Then come the B-25 Mitchells, squat, twin-engine bombers designed to carry ordnance deep into enemy territory. The B-25 is not elegant. It's sturdy, workmanlike, a machine built for function over form. 8 machine guns mounted across the fuselage, a solid airframe designed to absorb punishment. But by April 1943, it's absorbing punishment it was never designed to take. The strategic situation has shifted. Early war bombing was high-altitude precision, fortresses and liberators dropping from 25,000 feet. But accuracy from that altitude is fantasy. Formation bombing is better, but it's still a crapshoot. So 15th Air Force has pivoted. Tactical bombing. Medium altitude, tighter formations, faster runs. The B-25 is perfect for this doctrine. Fast enough to escape enemy fighters. Durable enough to absorb flak. Crew of 5. Pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, radio operator, waist gunner. Except fast and durable aren't fast enough. Not anymore. The Luftwaffe has adapted. They've learned the B-25's profile. They know its speed envelope. They know where the blind spots are. And they're waiting. Loss rates have climbed from acceptable to catastrophic. In the past 6 weeks, 15th Air Force has lost 47 B-25s. That's 235 men. Most of them young enough that they still have mothers waiting for letters. The official explanation channel's doctrine. Bomber crews must expect losses. The enemy is skilled. Flak concentrations are heavier than anticipated. Operational losses are within acceptable parameters. The B-25 is doing its job. The crews are doing theirs. Regrettable, but this is war. Except the mechanics see something different. They see planes that shouldn't be breaking. Planes that are breaking in the same places, the same ways, under conditions that aren't as severe as the doctrine claims. Master Sergeant Thomas Garrett is 34 years old. Too old for combat flight, too stubborn for desk duty. He's been an aircraft mechanic since 1936, back when the Army Air Corps was small and training was personal. He grew up in Akron, Ohio. His father was a tire technician, the old kind, the ones who understood rubber and chemistry and how materials behaved under stress. Thomas learned to think in tolerances and material properties. He could identify aircraft by the sound of their engines before he could identify people by their faces. He joined the Air Corps because he loved machines more than he loved people. And machinery, at least, was honest. It failed predictably. It told you what was wrong if you knew how to listen. By 1940, he was a senior crew chief at Wright Field in Dayton, supervising maintenance on experimental fighters. He worked on early Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts still being debugged, aircraft that existed in that liminal space between theory and practice. He learned something during those years. New designs always have problems. The problems are predictable. Stress concentrations, fatigue points, assembly tolerances that looked fine on paper but failed in practice. The engineers designed for ideal conditions. Reality was never ideal. When the B-25 entered service, Garrett was assigned to 15th Air Force as a maintenance supervisor. His job was to keep aircraft flying. It was simple until it wasn't. The B-25 came with known limitations. It had a reputation for being a flying coffin if you hit the wrong angle, if the flak found the right spot. Early production models had structural issues. Later ones were refined. But refinement in engineering is always incremental. You solve one problem and discover two more hiding underneath. By March 1943, Garrett had walked through the wreckage of 23 B-25s. Some were combat losses, clearly hit by flak or cannon fire. Others were different. They came back damaged, yes, but the damage didn't match the severity. A plane that should have flown home came down missing an engine and a wing spar. A plane that took a direct hit to the fuselage kept flying. A plane with a superficial wound suddenly went into a spin. Garrett began cataloging, documenting, walking each wreck with a notebook and a measuring tape. He measured structural failures down to the millimeter. He examined welds under magnification. He traced crack patterns through aluminum skin. What he found didn't match doctrine. The B-25's fuselage is a semi-monocoque design. The skin carries structural load. It's efficient. It's elegant. It's also vulnerable to localized stress concentration. The wings attach at a particular angle. The fuselage transitions from the tail boom through a narrow neck. Stress doesn't distribute evenly through this geometry. It clusters, like water finding cracks in concrete. When a B-25 takes flak damage, a near miss that creates shockwave, a glancing hit that dents rather than punctures, the force is absorbed by the fuselage in concentrated points. The skin ripples. The stringers warp. The welds that hold the frame together flex slightly beyond their designed limits. One hit. Recovery happens. The plane flies home. But in combat, there's rarely one hit. There are salvos. Multiple rounds in quick succession. Each one deforms the structure slightly more. Each one moves the metal further from its original geometry. And then, somewhere over the Adriatic on the flight home, a hard turn at low fuel state triggers accumulated stress. A weld that was weakened by the first hit finally fails under the load of the turn. The skin buckles. Structural integrity is suddenly compromised. And then the next turn is the last turn. Garrett tried the official channels first. He wrote a memorandum to the engineering officer, documented the patterns, included photographs and measurements. The response came back within a week. The B-25 design is proven. Losses are consistent with operational expectations. Garrett's observations are noted but don't indicate systemic failure. Translation: a sergeant with a toolbox doesn't get to question the design. He tried again with a second memo, this one including specifics. The stress concentration at the fuselage wing attachment. The weld patterns that showed early cracking. The structural properties of the aluminum alloy under repeated cyclic loading. This time, the engineering officer called him in personally. The conversation was polite. The engineering officer was a captain, college-educated, by the book. He listened to Garrett's concerns. He acknowledged the documentation. Then he explained, carefully, that the B-25 had been tested extensively at Wright Field. That combat losses, while regrettable, were within acceptable parameters for medium bombers. That 15th Air Force had other priorities. That structural modifications required testing, approval, and production retooling. He told Garrett that his dedication was appreciated, but that he needed to stop pursuing this line of inquiry. Orders had come down from Mediterranean Theater Command. No unauthorized modifications. No deviations from established maintenance procedures. If Garrett had concerns, submit them through proper channels. He'd already tried proper channels. The conversation ended. Garrett left the office understanding what the captain hadn't said directly. Persistence would result in reassignment. Insubordination would result in court-martial. The system had spoken, and Garrett was a small man in a large system. So he did what Calloway had done. He stopped asking permission. He stopped writing memos. And late at night, after the flight crews had staggered off to sleep, he returned to the maintenance hangars with a torch and a toolbox. The 15th Air Force's tactical doctrine was sound in principle, bad in practice. Strategic bombing from high altitude. The theory was precision. The reality was that bombing from 25,000 feet is like throwing darts at a moving target in a hurricane. Accuracy is measured in miles, not feet. A bombing run that destroys a railway yard is a success. A bombing run that destroys a field near a railway yard is recorded the same way. So the doctrine shifted. Tactical bombing. Lower altitude, tighter formations, faster runs. The B-25 was perfect, capable of 300 miles per hour at 10,000 feet. Fast enough to outrun pursuing fighters, if the damage isn't too severe. Nimble enough to evade at lower altitudes. 8 machine guns spread across the fuselage gave it defensive firepower that made enemy fighters respect the formation. The problem was that this doctrine required the B-25 to do things it wasn't optimized for. High-speed maneuvers at low altitude. Rapid climbs and dives. Sustained turns under combat G-forces. The aircraft could do these things, technically, but sustained performance under stress revealed weaknesses in the original design. The Luftwaffe had adapted too. They'd learned that B-25 formations could be broken if you hit the right angle. A fighter attack from the nose quarter, where the B-25's guns had reduced coverage. A quick pass, guns blazing, then climb back to altitude. By the time the B-25s could respond, the fighter was gone. The B-25 squadrons lost formation integrity under these attacks. Damaged bombers fell behind. Isolated bombers were intercepted by waiting fighters. The loss rate climbed from 8% to 12% to 14%. And then in late March, 15th Air Force Command made a decision. They'd received intelligence that a rail marshalling yard near Lake Kamacchio was being used to move German artillery north. Destroy that facility, and you delay enemy reinforcements by weeks. The mission was assigned to 3 B-25 squadrons. 24 aircraft, full bomb loads. Expected enemy fighter opposition moderate to strong. The briefing was straightforward. Fly in at 8,000 feet. Bombing run duration 3 minutes. Tight formation. Expect flak and fighter opposition. Return to base. Losses were estimated at 10 to 15%. Acceptable. The flight launched at dawn. 24 B-25s in 3 formations, each separated by a mile for mutual support. Spitfire escort provided top cover. The run south took 90 minutes. The bombers arrived at the lake in clear weather. Target visibility was excellent. Flak began immediately. The AA guns around the marshalling yard opened up. Black puffs of shrapnel bloomed around the formations. The first B-25 took a hit in the right engine. Smoke and flames. The engine died. The pilot feathered the prop, shut down, maintained formation on one engine. Fuel consumption would be brutal, but he could make it home. The second pass, a bomb run from the north. The formations turned, descended slightly, straightened for the run. More flak. This time a direct hit on the fuselage of one aircraft. The explosion was visible from 2 miles away. The B-25 fell out of formation, nose down, spiral. No chutes. 9 men. The bombs dropped. The marshalling yard erupted. Fuel dumps burning. Ammunition storage destroyed. Track twisted. A successful run, measured in damage to the target. Measured in mission accomplished. Measured in the 12 B-25s that didn't return. Of the 12 remaining B-25s that returned to Gioia del Colle for made emergency landings. 2 with one engine out. 1 with the rudder damaged and difficult to control. 1 with the hydraulic system partially compromised. Flaps wouldn't deploy, landing gear stuck, belly landing on foam-covered runway. Garrett was there when they came in. He walked each airframe, assessing damage. And in each one, he found the same pattern. Structural deformation clustered around the fuselage wing attachment points. Welds that showed stress fractures under magnification. The thin skin around the bomb bay dented and creased in patterns that didn't match flak shrapnel damage. These aircraft had absorbed cumulative stress, not catastrophic hits. The ones that made it back were the ones whose crews got them to the target and away before the structural degradation became critical. The ones that didn't make it back probably lost structural integrity somewhere over the Adriatic, pushed one turn too far by a pilot trying to avoid flak. Garrett documented everything. Photographs, measurements, samples of cracked aluminum. And he reached a conclusion that should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. The B-25 wasn't designed for this kind of tactical bombing. It could carry the load. It could fly the speed. It could absorb moderate damage. But the cumulative stress of sustained combat maneuvers at 8,000 feet was degrading the structure faster than the engineers had anticipated. The design worked for the aircraft's theoretical mission profile. It failed catastrophically when asked to perform outside those parameters. And the military had given the B-25 exactly that mission profile. Tactical bombing, low altitude, high speed, combat maneuvers. The death rate was physics, not cowardice or incompetence. Garrett's first modification was simple: reinforce the fuselage wing attachment point. The connection was sound in theory, but the welds were optimized for smooth flight, not combat G-forces. If he could distribute the stress load more evenly, prevent the concentration point from developing, he could extend the aircraft's combat durability. He located aluminum stock in the maintenance facility, scrap from damaged aircraft repair, material he could use without drawing requisitions that would be noticed. He sketched a reinforcement plate, thin aluminum that would slide into the fuselage interior, fastened with rivets to the main wing attachment structure. The modification added 8 pounds. Minimal weight penalty. Minimal drag if designed correctly. Maximum stress distribution. Installation was the problem. It required opening the fuselage interior, removing insulation, drilling new rivet holes, closing everything back up. On a single aircraft, the work would take 8 to 10 hours. On a fleet of 24 B-25s, it was impossible without being noticed. So Garrett chose one aircraft. B-25H, serial number 42 to 64582. Tail number, Renegade. The aircraft was assigned to Captain James Whitmore, a pilot with 23 previous missions. Experienced. Aggressive. The kind of pilot who pushed the aircraft hard. If the modification worked, it would work under Whitmore's hands. If it failed, at least the failure would generate data. Garrett worked alone, at night, after the last flight crews had gone to the officers' club. He removed the side panels of the fuselage, accessed the interior structure, filed the reinforcement plate to precise dimensions, drilled new rivet holes, and installed the modification using hand tools and careful measurement. The work took him 12 hours spread across 3 nights. On the third night, at 0400 hours, he drove the last rivet home. He stepped back, examined his work by torchlight, and saw no obvious evidence. The modification was invisible unless you knew where to look. He reinstalled the panels, replaced the insulation, and signed off on routine maintenance. B-25H 42 to 64582 was airworthy. No mention of unauthorized modification. No indication that anything had changed. 2 days later, the aircraft was assigned to a patrol mission. Dawn launch. 2 hours. Low-level coastal sweep looking for German naval vessels. Routine. Low risk. A good test of the modification under conditions that wouldn't stress it maximally. Whitmore flew the aircraft and reported no anomalies. The control response felt normal. The fuel consumption was on spec. The aircraft handled as expected. Garrett waited. If the modification had compromised structural integrity, evidence would appear. Cracks in the welds. Unusual vibration. Changes in control response. Instead, nothing. The aircraft returned to full service rotation. On April 18th, 15th Air Force launched a new strike mission. Intelligence indicated a German motor pool moving north, concentrated around a town called Messina. 3 squadrons assigned. 18 B-25s. Bombing run anticipated, fighter opposition likely. Captain Whitmore's aircraft was loaded with 500-pound general-purpose bombs. Garrett watched the B-25's launch at dawn. He did the math in his head. The mission would take 4 hours. Bombing run approximately 12 minutes. That meant sustained formation flying, combat turns if fighters appeared, the kind of stress profile that had broken previous aircraft. If the reinforcement plate was going to matter, it would matter today. The waiting was difficult. Garrett didn't speak to anyone about the modification. Didn't reveal what he'd done. He simply worked, attending to aircraft maintenance, watching the clock, calculating fuel burn rates, estimating return time. The first B-25s came back on schedule. 1,235 hours. Whitmore's formation was late, diverted by weather, reported by radio. They'd have minimum fuel margins on return. Garrett was waiting on the flight line when Renegade taxied to a stop. The aircraft was damaged. Flak had hit the left wing, creating a small hole near the aileron. The fuselage had taken multiple impacts, Garrett counted 47 shrapnel holes in the skin, most around the wing root area. The right engine was running rough, smoke trailing intermittently. But the aircraft was intact. The structure was sound. There was no visible crack or deformation around the fuselage wing attachment. The aircraft that Garrett had predicted would break had survived. Whitmore climbed out of the cockpit. He looked exhausted. His co-pilot was bleeding from a shoulder wound. Flak had penetrated the cockpit sidewall. The bombardier had bruises covering his torso. But they were alive, and the aircraft was reparable. Garrett walked around the fuselage slowly, examining the damage. The pattern was clear. Multiple flak hits concentrated around the same area where previous aircraft had failed. But there was no structural collapse. No catastrophic weld failure. The aircraft had absorbed the damage and flown home. He didn't approach Whitmore. Didn't say anything. He simply returned to the hangar and began the repair work. Over the next 3 weeks, Garrett installed the reinforcement modification on 11 more aircraft. Always at night. Always alone. Always carefully constructed to leave no evidence of what had been done. He chose his aircraft carefully. The older airframes. The ones that had already absorbed moderate damage. The ones that would have been expected to fail. And then on May 14th, something unexpected happened. The intelligence summary came down that morning. A Luftwaffe airfield was being used as a forward operating base, just outside a town called Gela in Sicily. Fighter concentration was building. The threat to Allied operations was escalating. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Intelligence assessed 6 to 8 German fighters based at the facility. Single-engine fighters, likely Bf-109s. Destroy the airfield, destroy the fighters on the ground, and you buy yourself air superiority for the next week. The mission was assigned to 4 B-25 squadrons. 32 aircraft. Dawn launch. Bomb load. 4 500-pound general-purpose bombs, fused for delayed explosion. Target. Runway. Dispersal areas. Fuel storage. The briefing was held at 0400 hours. Pilots filed into the intelligence tent, half asleep, holding cups of weak coffee. The intelligence officer outlined the target, showed photographs, explained the expected flak concentration, estimated enemy fighter opposition as light to moderate. Expect losses, the briefing officer said. But the importance of this target justifies the risk. For squadrons, 32 pilots. Statistically, 4 to 6 wouldn't come back. That was the math. That was war. Captain James Whitmore attended the briefing. Renegade was loaded and ready. His crew was briefed. They understood the risks. At 0530, the first B-25s rolled toward the runway. The flight to Sicily took 75 minutes. The formation climbed to 8,000 feet, crossed the Ionian Sea in clear weather, descended as they approached the target. The Gela airfield was visible from 30 miles out, a scar of concrete in agricultural terrain. No flak defenses initially. The aircraft had complete surprise. The formations split as they approached. Whitmore's squadron was assigned the southern dispersal area. 8 B-25s in 2 formations, separated by 500 feet. Nose cannon ready. Bomb bays armed. The run was clean. No enemy fighters visible. No AA fire initially. The bomb bay doors came open. The bombardiers aligned on target. Whitmore held formation speed, 300 miles per hour, steady descent, 2 miles to release point. Then the flak started. 88mm guns opened up from positions around the airfield perimeter. Black bursts erupted around the formations. The first B-25 took a direct hit. Fuel tank ignition. The aircraft fell out of formation, trailing flame. The crew was visible for a moment. 3 men bailing out before the aircraft hit the ground. Whitmore's aircraft flew through the flak pattern. Rounds burst in sequence. The formation absorbed multiple impacts. The bombardier called out the hits over the intercom. Flak, 2 o'clock. Flak, nose. Flak, starboard wing. The aircraft shuddered. The airframe groaned. Whitmore held the formation, steady, on course. The bombs were released at 1,200 feet. The entire load dropped in sequence. The runway erupted. Then German fighters appeared. 6 Bf-109s, diving from 10,000 feet, coming down on the formations from the north. The B-25's top cover had been drawn away by a fighter sweep further north. The bombers were alone. Whitmore saw the 109s and did what B-25 pilots were trained to do. Break formation. Dive. Run for the coast. Speed was the only advantage. Survive the intercept, and you could outrun them. His aircraft dove to 2,000 feet, engines at war emergency power. The 109s came down after him. One locked on, closing from 1,000 yards. Machine gun fire walked across Renegade's fuselage. Holes appeared in the skin. The co-pilot side panel exploded in splinters. Whitmore yanked the aircraft hard left. 8 Gs. The fuselage twisted. The structural stress was enormous. The airframe that had been reinforced by Garrett's modifications took the load and responded. Control surfaces slapped. The aircraft came out of the turn still flying. The 109 overshot. Whitmore dropped lower, 1,500 feet, then 1,000. The landscape filled the windscreen. Fields, trees, a small village. He threaded between terrain features, using the landscape to break pursuit geometry. The 109s couldn't follow at that altitude without risking their own aircraft. The pursuit ended. But Whitmore's problem had just begun. He had 3 engines running. The left engine had taken cannon fire. The hydraulic system was damaged. The fuel gauges showed red across the board. He burned heavy fuel during the combat maneuvers and the dive to low altitude. He was 120 miles from base with fuel for 90 miles. Whitmore reduced throttle, leaned the mixture, pitched for best cruise efficiency. He called his crew. Damage report. The bombardier reported the nose section was intact. The radio operator reported both gunners were unhurt, but the fuselage was holed in 23 places. The co-pilot was bleeding from his shoulder, but still functional. No catastrophic structural damage. The aircraft was still flying. Whitmore turned north, toward Joya del Col, and began the long flight home. The Mediterranean lay ahead. Empty water, no alternate landing sites if the fuel ran dry. The only option was reaching the base. The math was tight. 120 miles remaining. Fuel for 90 to 100. A 20-mile margin if his calculations were good. No margin if the wind was stronger than forecasted. He held the aircraft level at 3,000 feet. Steady, economical cruise. The damaged left engine sputtered occasionally, but held power. The fuel gauges crept downward. Behind him, the other B-25s from his flight were scattered. One was already ahead, one was behind. All were low on fuel. The coast appeared at 1,445 hours. The Italian mainland. The airfield was 40 miles inland. 25 minutes of flight time if fuel held. The fuel gauge on the right tank showed empty. Whitmore switched to the center tank. The gauge showed 50 gallons. 30 minutes of flight time. Maybe more if he nursed the throttle. The terrain passed below. Olive groves. Red soil. Mountains in the distance. Nothing but engine noise and the sound of wind through damaged fuselage panels. The crew didn't talk. They conserved oxygen, conserved movement, thought about landing. At 15:15, the right engine started to cough. Whitmore switched fuel tanks again. Left tank. The gauge showed 30 gallons. 10 minutes of flight time. The airfield was 15 minutes away. The left engine sputtered. Both engines running on fumes. The aircraft had maybe 15 minutes before complete fuel starvation. At 15:23, the airfield appeared. Whitmore called the tower. Declared minimum fuel. Requested immediate landing clearance. The tower cleared him to land. He throttled back, pitched for descent. The damaged landing gear came down. It had been manually cranked. The flaps descended partially, hydraulic pressure insufficient for full deflection. The aircraft was heavy, slow responding, damaged. Landing this aircraft was going to be difficult. Whitmore aligned with the runway. The aircraft descended. 300 feet. 200. The right engine sputtered again. Died. Whitmore feathered the prop, held the descent steady. One engine. The wheels touched concrete at 15:27. The aircraft touched down hard, bouncing once, settling, rolling. Whitmore applied brakes carefully. The damaged hydraulic system was responding sluggishly. The aircraft decelerated. 80 miles per hour, 60, 40, 20. It stopped 500 yards short of the runway end. Silence. The left engine shut down, complete fuel starvation. Whitmore sat in the cockpit, hands still gripping the yoke, breathing hard. His heart was pounding. The adrenaline crash was starting. Around him, the flight line was already moving. Ground crews sprinting toward the aircraft. Garrett arriving at a run with the maintenance team, assessing damage. Whitmore climbed out slowly. His legs didn't want to support him. The co-pilot helped him down. Together they walked around the aircraft, looking at the damage. The fuselage was shredded. Machine gun rounds had pierced the skin in dozens of places. The right engine was visibly damaged, oil streaking the cowling. The left wingtip was torn. The tail assembly had flak holes. The underside of the fuselage around the bomb bay was dented and creased. And yet the aircraft was intact. The structure was sound. There was no catastrophic failure, no buckled panels, no cracked welds. Garrett walked slowly around the aircraft, examining the fuselage wing attachment point. His eyes searched for the damage pattern he'd seen before. The progressive structural failure that had claimed other aircraft under similar conditions. There was nothing. The reinforcement plate was invisible, but its effect was undeniable. The aircraft had survived stresses that should have broken it. Whitmore saw Garrett examining the damage. Their eyes met briefly. Whitmore nodded slightly. He understood. That aircraft had carried him home because someone had bent the rules. The official debriefing took 2 hours. Whitmore sat in the intelligence tent and described the mission. The surprise was complete. The bomb run was accurate. Damage to the Jela airfield was significant. The fighter intercept was expected. The evasion was textbook. The fuel situation was marginal but manageable. Intelligence officers made notes. The commanding officer asked about the aircraft damage. Whitmore described the combat maneuvers. 8 G-turns. High-speed, low-altitude evasion. The aircraft absorbed it all and kept flying. That airframe has been through hell, Whitmore said. Most B-25s would have come apart under that kind of stress. This one held. The commanding officer made a note. He ordered the aircraft inspected thoroughly, damage assessed, aircraft status determined. Meanwhile, Garrett was already working. He had the aircraft moved to the maintenance hangar. With his team, he began documenting every piece of damage. Photographs, measurements, analysis of stress patterns, and most importantly, he kept the reinforcement modification secret. The inspection report came back in 2 days. The aircraft was airworthy. Battle damage was severe but non-critical. The structure was sound. Repairs would take approximately 1 week. The commanding officer read the report and thought about what it meant. A B-25 that should have been grounded, that should have been written off, that had survived combat maneuvers and flak damage that normally grounded aircraft. Not because it was any different from other B-25s, just because this one had been maintained differently. He called Garrett to his office. The conversation was brief. The commanding officer asked about the aircraft's maintenance history. Garrett explained routine procedures, careful inspection, preventive maintenance. Nothing out of the ordinary. The commanding officer asked if there was anything special about the aircraft that made it more durable. Garrett hesitated. He could have lied, could have said nothing, could have claimed it was just luck. Instead, he told the truth. He showed the commanding officer the reinforcement plate. He explained the structural weakness in the B-25's design. He described the stress concentration at the fuselage wing attachment. He showed photographs of failed aircraft and explained why they'd failed. And he asked permission to retrofit the modification to all B-25s in the squadron. The commanding officer looked at the reinforcement plate for a long moment. He looked at the photographs. He looked at Garrett. Then he asked a direct question. Is this modification approved by Engineering Command? No, sir, Garrett said. Did you conduct this work without authorization? Yes, sir. The commanding officer sat back in his chair. He could have had Garrett arrested. Insubordination. Unauthorized modification. Violation of protocol. Court-martial was justified. Instead, he picked up the phone and called Mediterranean Theater Engineering. The conversation lasted 15 minutes. The commanding officer explained the situation, the modification, the results, the survival of an aircraft that should have failed. He asked for rapid authorization to retrofit the modification fleet-wide. Engineering Command's response was predictable. They needed to verify the design. They needed to conduct testing. They needed to maintain proper procedures. Standard authorization timelines were 6 to 8 weeks. The commanding officer said they didn't have 6 to 8 weeks. They had pilots dying. Aircraft failing under conditions the engineers hadn't fully anticipated. He wanted authorization by tomorrow. Engineering Command said it wasn't possible. The commanding officer said in that case, he would assume full responsibility for the modification, authorize it locally, and retrofit his entire squadron by the end of the week. If someone wanted to court-martial him for saving pilots' lives, he'd see them in court. There was a long pause. Then Engineering Command approved the modification, pending full technical review, with the understanding that this was an emergency authorization for this squadron only. It was enough. Garrett and his maintenance team worked around the clock. They sourced aluminum stock from supply dumps across the theater. They fabricated reinforcement plates using the templates Garrett had developed. They installed the modification on every B-25 in the 321st Bomb Squadron. Within 10 days, all 24 aircraft had been modified. Then something unexpected happened. Two pilots from the neighboring squadron, the 322nd, approached Garrett. They'd heard about the modification. They wanted it on their aircraft too. Garrett refused. It wasn't authorized for their squadron. Proper channels needed to be followed. But the pilots went to their commanding officer. And that commanding officer called the 321st commander. And he said his pilots were asking for the modification. And if it was saving lives in one squadron, wasn't it worth considering for all squadrons? The 321st commander authorized the 322nd to proceed. By mid-June, 3 complete squadrons had the modification. By August, it had been rolled out to all B-25 squadrons in 15th Air Force. By September, Mediterranean Theater Engineering had completed their technical review. They confirmed that Garrett's design was sound. They confirmed that the modification did distribute stress more evenly. They confirmed that combat survival rates for modified aircraft were demonstrably higher. But the official authorization came too late. By then, the modification was already fleet standard. It was easier to officially approve what was already happening than to reverse the process. Garrett received no formal recognition. His name appeared in maintenance logs, in technical bulletins, in engineering change notices. But there was no medal, no commendation, no official acknowledgement that he had personally saved dozens of lives by bending rules and trusting his own judgment. He didn't care. He wasn't interested in medals. He was interested in numbers. Between April and December 1943, 15th Air Force lost 62 B-25s in combat operations. That's 310 men. Of those 62 losses, intelligence and analysis determined that approximately 18 were attributable to catastrophic structural failure. Aircraft that had taken moderate damage and then failed under the stress of combat maneuvers or rapid descent. With Garrett's modification fleet-wide, the structural failure rate dropped to approximately 4 aircraft. That's approximately 20 lives saved. Conservative estimate. The exact number is unknowable. How do you count the aircraft that didn't crash? The pilots who came home instead of auger NG into the Mediterranean? The crew members who climbed out of damaged aircraft instead of becoming statistics? You don't. You note the improvement in loss rates. You observe that aircraft are surviving damage that would have been fatal. You document the fact that modified B-25s show superior durability under combat stress. And you move on to the next problem. The modification never appeared in official doctrine. It was never advertised as revolutionary. It was simply incorporated into standard maintenance procedures. The reinforcement plate became part of the B-25's design, so standard that newer production models incorporated it directly into the airframe. Pilots from other theaters heard about the modification. It spread. The P-47 squadrons in the European theater requested a similar reinforcement for their aircraft. The designers of the new B-26 Marauder incorporated lessons learned from Garrett's work into their initial design specifications. The modification became invisible because when innovation is done correctly, it becomes standard. It ceases to be remarkable and becomes baseline. Thomas Garrett left the Army Air Forces in 1945. He returned to Akron, Ohio, and took a job at Goodyear Aircraft, working on the structural design of new aircraft. He was good at it. He understood materials. He understood how stress distributed through complex geometries. He understood where failures would occur before they happened. He worked at Goodyear for 22 years. He was promoted to senior structural engineer. He had a team working under him. He contributed to the design of commercial aircraft that would carry hundreds of thousands of people safely through the sky. He married, had a daughter, lived a quiet, ordinary life. He never talked much about the war. Occasionally, at company social events, people would ask him about his military service. He'd give brief answers. Mechanic, B-25s, 15th Air Force, nothing more. In 1962, an aviation historian was researching structural engineering innovations in World War II aircraft. Someone mentioned the B-25 reinforcement plate. The historian tracked Garrett down. He was retired by then, living in suburban Akron, still sharp, still thinking in tolerances and stress curves. The historian asked him about the modification. Garrett confirmed the basic facts. He explained the structural weakness. He described the solution. He showed the original sketches, drawn in pencil on the back of maintenance forms. The historian asked if Garrett regretted operating outside the chain of command. Garrett thought about it. He said that regret was a luxury. In 1943, he didn't have time for regret. Pilots were dying. The system was broken. He fixed it. The rest was just process. The historian published his findings in a journal on military aviation history. It generated mild interest. A few academic citations. A mention in a book on World War II aircraft design. But mostly it faded. Thomas Garrett died in 1987. His obituary mentioned his military service. It didn't mention the reinforcement plate. It didn't mention the lives saved. It didn't mention the man who looked at a problem that the system said couldn't be solved and solved it anyway, in the dark, with a toolbox and a conviction. But the reinforcement plate is still there. In museums, in restoration projects, in technical manuals archived at the Air Force Historical Records Center. It's a small thing. 8 pounds of aluminum, 12 rivets. A modification so simple it barely registers as innovation. And yet it worked. War is often told as a story of great machines and great victories. Decisive battles. Brilliant strategy. The big moments that change history. But wars are not won by single moments of brilliance. They're won by 1,000 small decisions made by people whose names no one remembers. People who see a problem, solve it, and move on without waiting for recognition. Thomas Garrett was one of those people. A mechanic, a craftsman, a man who understood that systems have limits, that designs have blind spots, that the engineers don't always see what the ground crews see. He mocked authority, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. He broke the rules because the rules were killing people. He worked alone in the dark because the system wouldn't listen when he asked. And he did it all without any guarantee that he would be remembered, much less recognized. His aircraft came home. His pilots lived. That was enough. The reinforcement plate lives in museums now. A curiosity, a small footnote in the history of aircraft design. But every B-25 pilot who walked away from combat that shouldn't have been survivable owed his life to that plate. Every crew member who climbed out of a damaged fuselage intact owed his life to that small piece of aluminum riveted to a stress junction. Some legacies are carved in marble. Some are written in official history. Others are written into the physics of survival, invisible until you look closely, enduring long after the men who created them are forgotten. Thomas Garrett understood that. He didn't need the world to know his name. He just needed pilots to come home. And one April morning in 1943, when Captain James Whitmore landed a damaged B-25 with empty fuel tanks and 47 flak holes in the fuselage, Garrett knew he'd succeeded. The aircraft was still flying. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.